We're going to talk now about nitrogen cycle. And it is so important to have a discussion on this cycle because it has already passed the planetary boundary. And we know that it is because of the overuse of fertilizers to supply food to the humanity, right? So we're gonna just start discussing some key points first. So nitrogen is an essential nutrient and it is found in all forms of life. And then another important thing to mention is that the main carbon storage in the planet is the atmosphere. Plants need the nitrogen, but they cannot directly use it from the atmosphere. So it has to be first reduced to ammonia or oxidized to nitrate before it can be taken up and assimilated by plants. There are some plants that are called nitrogen fixing plants, but it is just because the roots are populated with a certain type of bacteria that can fix nitrogen from the atmosphere. So this is why nitrogen is a common limiting nutrient in nature and in agriculture. And this is why fertilizers have been used intensively. So we're going to start discussing the nitrogen cycle from the fixation of nitrogen from the atmosphere. So several species of bacteria, fungi, and blue-green algae are capable of fixing nitrogen. And this is a process that comes from an organism capable of taking atmospheric nitrogen, or N2, and being able to reduce it to ammonium before it is converted to an organic form. There are two types of nitrogen-fixing microorganisms, ones that can have a symbiotic relationship with plants and are associated with the roots of legumes, of peas, soybeans, etc. And another ones that are called free-living nitrogen fixers. Nitrogen fixation requires energy and therefore it is not an easy process. Then we have the next process that is called nitrification. Nitrification is an aerobic transformation process that uses autotrophic microorganisms, which means that they oxidize ammonium into nitrate. And this biological nitrification is a two-step process that is carried out by different types of bacteria, some that are called nitrosomonas, and then other ones that are called nitrobacter, and these are all together called nitrifiers. Then we have another type of bacteria that carries out the nitrification process. It is the return of the nitrate and nitrate to the atmosphere as nitrogen gas. This is a widely used process in wastewater treatment for the removal of nitrogen from wastewater. A carbon source is required for this process, and therefore the organisms that that carry out this process are heterotrophs. And then we have another process going on that is called ammonification. This is a process where organic nitrogen or nitrogen that is being in dead animals and dead plants is converted to ammonium and ammonia. That enters the cycle again by going into the nitrification process, for example. It is worth mentioning that these are the major processes in general in nature, although there are some other processes going on where nitrogen is being transformed by bacteria through other pathways. And one example is the Anamox process. And in the figure that I'm showing you here, we can see the major processes of the nitrogen cycle. And these ones include the ones that we discussed, but also includes the industrial fixation that we're going to talk about, and also atmospheric fixation of nitrogen, and also the release of nitrogen from rocks. So let's start now talking about the alteration of the nitrogen cycle. And before talking about the industrial processes, we're going to question or ask ourselves, how do we use our land? And this, if we answer this question, we will find out why nitrogen is now a global problem. So in this figure on the right side, I'm showing you the land, the natural vegetation on the planet. And this is the biomes that we discussed before: tropical forest, temperate forest, boreal forest, savanna, tundra, etc. And then we can, on the second figure, what I'm showing you is the croplands, the land that is being used for croplands, and also at the bottom, the land that is being used for pastures and rangelands. So what you see now is that, of course, in the most productive areas of the planet, we use them for croplands, and also we use them for pastures and rangelands. And what is important is that 1/3 of these croplands is being used to feed animals. And then 2/3 of the total agricultural land is being used for pastures and rangelands. So you can guess now what is the problem. And it is not only the population growth, but it's also the way of that we are feeding ourselves. So to understand why are we here on this situation, we need to go back to what happened during the industrial revolution and all the things that happened with the development of technologies, right? So we know that we humans cannot, or plants cannot fix nitrogen. But then we came up with a very revolutionary process, the Haber-Bosch process, that allows us to fix nitrogen from the atmosphere. At the beginning, the motivation was not really food supply, it was the ammonia production to have more munitions for war, right? But then since then, everything changed completely. The story changed completely about the availability of the population to expand and to grow. And I want to go back to the Malthusianism, or the idea that the population growth is potentially exponential, while the growth of the food supply or other resources is linear. And I want to go back to this because the Haber-Bosch process changed completely the carrying capacity of the humanity to keep growing. So this is a figure that shows the world population, and then it shows also what would have happened if the world population would, if we wouldn't have found the Haber-Bosch process, how the growth would have occurred. And we also have the average fertilizer input and the meat production, who are still growing exponentially, according to the data that we have now. So this is actually the major issue and the major reason why we are disrupting the nitrogen cycle. So the nitrogen that is being consumed by humans ends up also in waste, right? But it's also the inefficient use of fertilizers, or the inefficiency of the fertilizers to be taken by the crops, that also is causing problems, because this nitrogen ends up in rivers and even in the oceans, and it's increasing nitrogen in areas where nitrogen should not be in those amounts, causing disruption also of growing plants to and causing environmental problems, such as the creation of dead zones in the sea and also in some rivers. So here we have a figure that shows the nitrogen flux in moles, 10 to 12 moles per year, and what has happened throughout the years. And you can see the big change from the 1950, that is at the beginning of the industrial, where is marked the industrial revolution, right? And then you can see the massive increase on loss of nitrogen via the nitrification, the accumulation in organic nitrogen, and also the export to open ocean, for putting some examples. But this clearly shows that we are putting nitrogen where it shouldn't be, and we are disrupting the ecosystems too. So all the nitrogen used for food production is added to the environment. And we also have to add the nitrogen that is being emitted from fossil fuel combustion. So in the 1990s, these two sources of nitrogen accounted for 160 teragrams of nitrogen per year. And this is where the starting of the balance that I'm showing you of the major processes that transform molecular nitrogen into reactive nitrogen and back. This being divided in this figure between the fluxes that are occurring in the land and the fluxes that are occurring in the ocean. So you can see that the natural fluxes are denoted in blue, and the orange fluxes here are denoted are related to the anthropogenic perturbation. So you can see here that the major transformations have been occurring in the land, and this is due to the fixation of nitrogen. So it's one percentage is the terrestrial nitrogen, industrial nitrogen fixation, and the other one is the fossil fuel burning. And then it enters into the system and it starts disrupting all the other processes that are going on nitrogen. And not only the processes of related to nitrogen, but it is also altering other cycles, such as the biological carbon cycle and the phosphorus cycle. So let's discuss the interactions between the nitrogen cycle and the carbon cycle. There are many possibilities for these interactions, but we're going to highlight the main anthropogenic drivers of these interactions during the 21st century. So the signs in this figure, what I'm highlighting is the interactions that occur within the biochemical cycles, and then the connection with the atmospheric drivers and the human drivers. So we're going to indicate in orange the anthropogenic impacts, and in blue we're going to indicate the normal interactions of these cycles. So to start understanding the interactions, we need to highlight that for biological processes, all processes have an optimal carbon to nitrogen ratio. So even for plant growth or for degradation of material, there is a need for a specific carbon to nitrogen ratio. So if we unbalance the amount of carbon or the amount of nitrogen that is available, this is going to disrupt these optimal ratios, and also is going to favor some processes over others. So then a potential scenario can be that the carbon, since there is a lot of nitrogen now in the spread in several ecosystems at concentrations higher than the regular ones, there can be a higher uptake of CO2 due to the increase in availability for doing the processes of photosynthesis. This may not be totally true, but there has been some findings that in some regions where there has been significant amount of fertilization, there is a slightly higher increase in uptake of CO2 from the atmosphere. So the question now is that if management of the global nitrogen cycle can help to mitigate climate change. So although there has been some propositions about fertilization of forests and marine ecosystems in the past, there is a scientific consensus that this may not be as positive as it is believed. But the truth is that now, with the amount of CO2 that we have in the atmosphere, if we want the primary producers to take this CO2, we need to consider that there has to be a proportional amount of nitrogen in order for this to occur.